Thursday morning in Europe, Thursday afternoon in Australia. It's Space Café Australia time again. This Space Café Australia with Annie Handmer will begin soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. My name is Chiara Monter. I'm the event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global and host of the Space Café Benelux. SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really, really appreciate this. Now, I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. The latest one features Urs Ganze, a space super nerd who talks about how to build your own spacecraft, so definitely worth a listen. And for all our fans of audio content, we also have new episodes in the Space Café Radio. We also like to keep our fan shop online open for you to support us actively and become a space watcher. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the events section and on our YouTube channel. And we will host our Space Café Australia live on a regular basis. And with that, my job is done, and I'd like to hand you over to your host in Sydney today. Annie, over to you.
G'day, Space Watchers. Welcome to Space Café Australia. Here at Space Café Australia, we share stories of people from across our country to document their roles and their experiences in Australian space. Now, first, before we begin, it's important to recognise the history and sovereignty of Indigenous peoples across Australia. SpaceWatch.Global and myself would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Indigenous and First Nations people here today and listening later. Sovereignty was never ceded. And today I'm joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'm here speaking with Briony Sturgess. One of the biggest questions I think that I ever have is about the role of government in the space sector. It's a role that has changed significantly over history, from the early days of the space race when government was super involved, through a bit of a lull. And then in the Australian context, perhaps the involvement of government is picking up again in a commercial era. But the question is, how is government involved? And then how should government be involved? And when and how and in what ways can government be supporting, and is government supporting space activities in Australia? Briony is the Associate Director for Space Investment Partnerships at Investment New South Wales. She's been working with New South Wales Government to support the space sector since 2018, during which time she developed and is now implementing the New South Wales Space Industry Development Strategy. As part of the strategy, the teams launched the National Space Industry Hub, a space qualification mission, which is Australia's first rideshare satellite, the Space Research Network, and the New South Wales node of the SmartSat CRC, or Cooperative Research Centre. Prior to joining New South Wales Government, Briony was an advisor to the Commonwealth Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science. She was closely involved in the review into the Australian space industry and the establishment of the Australian Space Agency. And in addition to all of these things, Briony is just a super lovely person who I really enjoy hanging out with. So thank you, Briony, for hanging out with me in the virtual cafe today and for being with us. How are you? How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm well, thank you. I took the cafe bit literally, and so I have my coffee-like drink here. So if you see me drinking, I'm just getting into the vibe of this being a cafe chat.
Amazing. I also have my SpaceWatch.Global mug, which says Space Watcher and is definitely very, very cool, which matches the t-shirt. So it's a whole vibe going on. And that's absolutely right. we can fix that. So, I mean, we've got people joining us from around the world. Everyone watching later will be joining from wherever they are. It's very early in Europe at the moment, so thank you to people who are awake. But we're hoping also that some people who can't normally watch this are able to be here. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. But Before we jump into everything, Briony, I'd like to ask you about an award nomination you got recently, and congratulate you on it. And could you tell us a bit more about it?
Sure. Yes, I recently found out I am a finalist for the Female Space Leader of the Year award for the Australian Space Awards, which are at the end of this month.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
And
yeah, it's an honor to have made the shortlist at all. It's amazing. Looking forward to the award ceremony, I guess. But it's based on the last year of activity. So honestly, a lot of that credit goes to my whole team for the work we've been putting in over the last year. So
classic response, Briony. Sharing the glory with others. But no, congratulations to you as well. And people in the chat are also adding their congratulations to that. And what have you been up to recently? I saw you've been doing ISU. How has it been going?
I have. So I over January and February did the Southern Hemisphere Space Studies program with University of South Australia and ISU. And it was intense, a very intense 5 weeks, but it was great. And it's part of I love what I do. I've really loved getting to know the space sector over the last 5 years. And I just wanted to get a better understanding of all the different elements, subsectors of space. So including space law, engineering, space science, all of that. And that seems like a really good way to find out just a little bit more about all those, and hopefully better speak the language of the stakeholders that I get to work with all the time. So yeah, and it certainly did that. It was fantastic lectures.
That's awesome. I have not done ISU, but I hear all sorts of exciting things about it. But I also heard that it is remarkably intense. And so I'm a little reticent to do it, although it does sound appealing to have a bit of a one-stop shop for these things. Did you learn anything that surprised you?
Well, I now know, I'm going to get the term wrong now, and that's going to be embarrassing. Solar maximum is, and how it affects technology, space tech.
Oh. Something
I did not know before. So I don't know why, that's the one that's really stuck in my head, all the solar flares and that activity. But anyway, that's the stuff I kind of geeked out on and was new for me.
Fantastic. That's great. Look, it sounds highly relevant to what you get up to anyway, which I want to dig into a bit more. So you and I have hung out on numerous occasions, but I actually realized I don't have a very good idea of what it is that you do day to day in your role. You work in space innovation, you work in partnerships, you work in Investment New South Wales, so an arm of government. What is it that you actually do?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that question.
I don't mean it in that way, Briony.
Yeah, no. Look, part of the challenge is that, and the amazing thing is it changes so frequently, day to day. Every day can be completely different. So Investment New South Wales is responsible for investment attraction and industry development of our priority sectors here in New South Wales, and space is one of them. So my team is responsible for space industry development and investment attraction. What that means is implementing the space industry development strategy that we launched back in 2020. Day to day, that means there's also still little bits and pieces that we do to keep industry connected and engaged, but also with each other and with researchers, but also with government. So we are, if you like, the conduit between industry and government for the space sector. If industry want to connect with government, we're here to help. If other parts of government want to better understand what's going on in the space sector or get involved with them or connect with someone, we're here to help connect and also translate the issues that the space sector has for other parts of government. We're also really busy implementing the 4 key funded programs that we launched under the strategy. So the National Space Industry Hub, which was officially launched just in February, which was very exciting.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it was that was a big one for us. I was very excited about that. You mentioned them all in the intro, and I can talk about them in more detail if you want. But the Space Research Network, the New South Wales nodes of the SmartSat CRC, and the Waratah Seed Space Qualification Mission, which will be Australia's first rideshare satellite.
Awesome. I want to talk particularly about the Space Industry Hub. I had the opportunity to go and have a little look at it before the official launch happened, but I was sort of hanging out with some space folk and had a little look around, and it is so exciting to have a place within Sydney, but also for New South Wales, where this kind of innovation is happening, and it's a bit of an accelerator. It's an interesting role for government to play though, right? Because normally when we think about government, we think of government as the regulator. So setting limits on the private sector and kind of like setting the parameters within which the private sector operates. But it's a different kind of role that you're talking about, in that you're actively trying to stimulate industry. Maybe if we just take a little step back, why is New South Wales interested in space? Like, what's going on there? What's the interest for Investment New South Wales?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find another sector that's just growing at the rate that the space sector is. And so there's a couple of reasons. One, there's huge potential for economic growth, and it's 9.5% they talk about per annum, the global growth of the space sector. Why would we not want a piece of that?
Sure.
On top of that, and I don't need to tell anyone on this phone call this, but what I say to other people when they say, why is New South Wales doing space? There is not a single industry or sector that is not already or will not be using space-enabled technology. I always say all of us have one of these in our pocket, which is a piece of space-enabled technology. So it is only going to continue to, it's going to continue to be incredibly important to the stability of our economy. And two, it's only going to continue to grow and be in high demand. So we have a lot of innovators in New South Wales. We have a lot of great R&D, a lot of startups and entrepreneurs. So why wouldn't we try to harness that? In terms of you saying it being an unusual role for government, I mean, that's the sort of stuff that we do across Investment New South Wales and in any of the priority sectors, is to try and facilitate the growth of these industries that we've decided are important for our future, to ensure a strong economy. And so it's looking at, when we wrote the strategy, we were looking at what are the market failures at the moment, where do we need to intervene because something's not working right. And in space, we had a lot of startups that it's we all know incredibly hard and incredibly expensive to get things into space and prove they work. There's a really long time where you got to do a lot of work and it's expensive, and you can't really, it's hard to get customers, and startups were struggling, and rent is expensive in Sydney. It's and another one was that the ecosystem wasn't very well connected. And they weren't collaborating a lot, and they didn't know that just down the road there was someone who could help them with a problem they were trying to solve. And so we looked at what we could do, what were some interventions that made sense that would help to address those market failures. Hence the National Space Industry Hub, which, as you said, for me I really wanted a place where space sector could convene, where they knew if you wanted to talk about space or go see companies that are doing space, you know where to start. Go to the hub, and that a place that can bring them together on a regular basis and connect them, but also provide support to startups, which is what they're doing through. One, you can just rent a desk at the hub, and there's no lock-in contracts, so it's got that flexibility that is really important for an early stage startup. But also they have free programs that anyone in Australia can participate in. Foundation's program is online and free. I guess not even just in Australia, anyone can participate in that. And then they have the Fast Start program, which is a competitive process, but if you get in, is free. So yeah.
Right, fantastic. This is really interesting, this idea of like trying to spark off an industry by finding out where the difficulties are and then doing things to make that easier. The connections thing is an interesting point. I often think that in the space sector, people assume that we're different to everyone else. Like there's this idea of it has to be space. So like, you can't just talk to someone who provides widgets. It has to be like specific to space. But maybe more often it is actually that a lot of things that companies need are able to be provided by non-space providers. You don't have to have something that's space specific for most things. Is that something you also think about in government, like connecting space to other industries?
Absolutely. And spin-ins is a huge measure of success for us as well. If they're a manufacturing company, as in like a manufacturing company that currently, I don't know, builds whatever nuts and bolts, but goes, oh, okay, this has space applications. We could, I don't know if I should be. Hacko Watches is the one that's always used by the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. They make like precision components for watches, but want to use their unique equipment in Australia to develop, those small, need to be precise pieces of equipment for satellite technology. So yeah. Pivoting into the space sector, and really we're going to have to do that if we want to see the growth that we want to see in Australia. But there was skepticism for sure when we awarded the hub to Cicada Innovations. The space, there were people in the space sector who were like, well, Cicada isn't a space company, why are you giving it to them? But we saw huge, apart from the fact that they have 20 years of deep tech incubation experience, we actually saw that there were benefits to the broad connections that they had in the medtech industry, in ag tech, in just generally tech startups that can, I think, we don't want the space sector to become too insular. There's definitely a lot of growth that can come from partnering with those other companies and those other technologies. So yeah.
We've had a question from Adrian, who has been listening in on our conversation. Briony, I hate to tell you, we're not really in a cafe and people are actually listening. But I've often thought it would be quite nice to run this live and have it sort of in a cafe, but then you tell people when you're going to be at the cafe and then they can come and listen in and eavesdrop formally.
Be creepy at all.
No, I think it would be quite fun. Anyway, Adrian has asked, how does the New South Wales Space Research Network, which has apparently been recently created, fit into the picture? So I think this is just an invitation for you to talk about the Space Research Network and what that's all about.
Okay. Oh, how does it fit into the picture? Was that the question? Yeah. So the Space Research Network is one of the latest in a series of innovation networks that has been set up by the New South Wales government, but another high-profile one is the Defence Innovation Network or the Smart Sensing Network. And firstly, we're trying to tie them all together as much as possible. So the Space Research Network is actually based in the National Space Industry Hub, and we're trying to make sure they, are talking regularly and not stepping on each other's toes or duplicating. But that is really focused on increasing collaboration between research organizations and with industry. But it's, too often research organizations and universities are competing with each other. And then we lose out on opportunities, especially these big federal opportunities that come along, because instead of working together and creating something great, everyone goes their own way and it's, it's too small or, So we really want to drive collaboration between all these fantastic capabilities we have across our universities in New South Wales, and get them commercializing more and collaborating with industry. So you'll notice there's a theme across all of our programs pretty much that's around commercialization of R&D and collaboration, but they all have a slightly different nuance, and the Space Research Network is very much focused on the universities.
Well, I guess that's a bit of a realistic approach, isn't it? Because people who love space like to think that government will just do stuff with space because, I don't know, because they think it's fun or something, but actually there has to be some sort of return. There has to be some benefit that can be demonstrated for government to get involved. It's not like a charitable institution, I guess, in some ways, which I suppose leads me into what I want to get onto, which is to hear about some of the things that you really, really like about what it is that you do, but also on the flip side, what are some challenges that you encounter? And I'm guessing that might be one of them, is various perceptions to do with what government should do or shouldn't do. But it's up to you. We can either start with the cake, which is the challenges, and then move on to the icing, which is the great stuff, or you can have the icing first and then the cake. This is your cafe.
If cake is a challenge, then this is amazing. If only my challenges were cake. Look, the good stuff. What's the good stuff? About my job, there's always new challenges and new opportunities and new projects coming up. So as I said, every day is, almost every day is different. There are something that's true, I think, probably generally of working for government. There are very few jobs where you get to be right in the middle of everything. And in space sector, I get to connect across so many different stakeholders and, with industry and researchers and federal government. And I love being able to be right at the center of the ecosystem and see so much of it. And feeling like the work we're having has an impact. One of the downsides is it can be very slow, but still, there's very few jobs where you can have such broad impacts potentially in the work you do. And so feel incredibly lucky in that. The challenges are things do work slowly in government. People need to understand that and accept that. Even I need to learn to accept that. It's incredibly frustrating at times, but it is inevitably, and we have to find a way to rarely can we find a way around that. And we just have to sort of accept that that's how it is and work with it. And the reason is we're dealing with taxpayer money. We're accountable to the New South Wales people. And as frustrating as it is, you've got to keep that in mind that that's why it is. That's why they take a long time and all the due process and going through, 5-6 different levels of approval is because they want to make sure they're being accountable. And ultimately, for any New South Wales taxpayers on the call, I hope that makes you go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm okay with that. I'm glad they're being accountable with our money. And as you sort of said, we can't help everyone. And I am passionate about the sector we work for and the work we do. So it does genuinely suck that we can't help everyone, but we can't. And we have to say no to people, and people take it personally a lot of the time. And that's hard. From our perspective, it's not personal. We just, we have a specific remit. We also are a small team. So we can't do everything. And a lot of the time, we're just not going to be able to help you in the way that you want us to help you. But there might be other ways we can help you.
So what are some of the ways that you can help people that isn't necessarily handing them money?
So you talked about the connection piece. We spend a lot of our time connecting people. They'll come to us and tell us what they're working on, and we say, oh, have you talked to this person, this person, this person? Oh, no. Well, you should go talk to them. They're just down the road from you, and they're doing something that is exactly what you're looking to solve. Or they come to us and say, we want to do this project, go for this opportunity. I'm like, well, great, but you don't want to go alone. Go talk to these people at this university over there. So we end up doing a lot of that. And that does lead to results for people, not always, but we get a lot of people who are really grateful that we've connected up with someone and it's turned out to be a really fruitful partnership. We can help promote what you're working on. We can support your events or activities, not with financial support, but sometimes, but there are other ways we can support it, promoting it, sending reps, having speakers, all sorts of things. If you've got a capability or a facility or something that you're struggling to sort out, we've helped companies, we really need XYZ, we don't even know where to start trying to get that, can you help? And if we can, we will. People who needed exemptions to travel during COVID, and we would facilitate, assist with that, in terms of letters of support. There's all sorts of ways, but we can't do that if we don't know what you're working on. So the first thing I say to people is, like voting, engage early and engage often. It's really helpful for us to have in the back of our mind what you're working on and understand your capabilities, because you never know when an opportunity comes up, be it an international investor or someone looking for a partner, where we can say, actually, yeah, we know some guys who are doing XYZ. We really think you should talk to them. So it's always really helpful for us to know what you're doing, and also what your challenges are. If we can gather enough information about the challenges of industry, we can put a case together for action. But those things take time. If you come to us and say, we have a problem, we need it solved tomorrow, we're probably not going to, sometimes we can help, probably not going to be able to help. But if we can build up this case over time, then we can make a case for why there should be further government intervention.
Why do things take so long in government?
I think I hope I answered that one. I genuinely think it's because they're trying to be accountable.
Sorry, what I mean is not necessarily why, for the perspective of like what's the reason that there are processes. I more mean, can you step us through how that looks? Like, what is a process that you would go through? For example, when you were trying to get the National Space Industry Hub set up, how long did that process take? Which we announced
we were going to do in 2018 or 2019.
Yeah.
So it took us about 3 years to officially launch it.
So what are the steps in between that you had to go through to get that to actually happen?
So firstly, you can't say, I have a great idea, give me $2.13 million, please. Right. So we had to consult with industry, make the case for it, build up those arguments, put together a business case, and then we had to figure out, if we're asking for money, how much and why are we asking for that much money, which I know lots of companies do all the time, so you'll understand all that. And then this has to go through several layers of approval and then go to cabinet to get signed off. And then if it gets signed off, you can't just pick someone to deliver it for you. You have to go through a competitive, open, transparent process. So you have to put it out for an EOI and see who is interested, and then have a very rigorous, thorough, transparent assessment of those applications, which we then had to down select and go through all of that again. And then you have a whole legal team that you have to work with on contracts. And on top of all that, in this case, we had suddenly COVID, and we're in the middle of an agency that's involved in economic development. So we had the economic fallout from COVID, and so entire teams being diverted to deal with that. And if people, the reality is in government, you also have machinery of government changes, and the space team is now in its third department since I have joined New South Wales government. And every time you do that, you have to make the case for why we're doing space all over again with a whole set of new decision makers. So,
right. So just existing is its own process.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Clearly, we've never failed to make that a case, and we're here and stronger than we were 3 years ago. But yeah, it's it's an important thing to know if you deal with government. You need to know what machinery of government changes are. And every time there's an election or a change of leadership, there will probably be a machinery of government change. And you need to understand that it's going to be very hard to get anything out of your relevant department if it's been affected by that for a little while as they completely restructure. So.
Yeah, because it's not just, so in my other life, I also work in government, as Briony knows, which is, I have huge empathy for this. And the machinery of government thing, like, it's not just a little restructure. It's like you move, your whole team might be amalgamated with a different team or might be disbanded, or you might be moved to it, as Briony's been moved to different departments. That just doesn't mean just that you go to a different desk. That's like a whole different IT system, whole different reporting lines, whole different processes that you then have to relearn. All of these different factors have to coalesce in a way that allows you to submit the right documents to the right people at the right time. They have to like be briefed and know what they're now responsible for. I actually think that it takes not just months, but like possibly years to actually recover from every machinery of government change. But unfortunately, they seem to happen more frequently than that. So it's like this constantly shifting experience that I think is hard to understand maybe from the private sector. Like if you think about government as a huge company, it is just massive. And just imagine like trying to get stuff
largest
done. Largest
employer in New South Wales. New South Wales government is the largest employer in New South Wales. And, I do want to caveat that by saying, of course, we do our very best to continue to do our day-to-day job and we continue to engage. But when there's anything key like asking for money or asking for a new program to be signed off, that's going to be incredibly difficult during those sort of big structural changes.
Yeah, for sure. Adrian's asked if there are mechanisms at Investment New South Wales to support commercialization, like idea to market for early stage space startups and uplift their technology maturity. I think the National Space Industry Hub is probably one. That's a new one. Mm-hmm. Are there any others that people should be aware of?
For space specifically?
I think so, yes. Space-specific startups.
So of course, the National Space Industry Hub, please go look at the website. There are things on there. We also have things like the Small Business Innovation Research Grants that come out of the Chief Scientist Office, which is part of Investment New South Wales. And those are potentially grants of $1.1 million. The first phase, if you're successful, is $100,000 as a proof of concept for the SBIRs are for challenges that government agencies are facing that they need an innovative solution for. And the idea is we're trying to give New South Wales small businesses or startups an opportunity to deliver that solution. So if you get through the first phase, it's $100,000 for the proof of concept. And then if that's successful, $1 million to actually do further work on it. There's no guarantee of a contract at the end of it, but obviously you're pretty well positioned with a solution by the end if it's worked out well. And if not, it's a pretty, I think, healthy grant to do that research and do that R&D. So there's that one. There's also the Physical Sciences Fund, which has just opened and closes, that this year's just opened and I think closes in May. Again, those are grants for people developing tech doing R&D in the physical sciences area. So absolutely, we've had a couple of space companies successful with those in the past. And then the New South Wales node of the SmartSat CRC has a couple of grant programs. There's the demonstrator program, which is for research industry collaborations around satellite technologies. There's also the infrastructure grant, which is to subsidize the cost of accessing testing facilities, that sort of thing, that are usually in universities and can be quite expensive for startups to access. So that subsidizes the cost of that. And there's a mobility program, which is a placement program. They'll pay for someone from university to be in your company for 6 months or vice versa. And it's completely paid for, the placement. So yeah, and then there's a bunch of grant programs under the Space Research Network as well. So thank you for all these Dorothy Dixes, Adrian.
It's not me, it's Adrian.
Yeah, thank you. So
thank you, Adrian.
But if you want, and do a little plug, we have a newsletter that my team also puts out generally once a month, more often if there's urgent news to share. And we try to use that to let people know about programs and opportunities that they probably don't necessarily find easily elsewhere. So the focus is on, say, government grants, government programs, but we also put some other, good news from local industry and that sort of thing in there. So you can subscribe to that on our website. It's called The Orbital, is the newsletter. And we try to share news of those sorts of programs when they open.
I've had another question come through, which is less of a Dorothy Dixer, but it leads us on to some important discussions, I think, which is pointing to basically there's politics at play in government on one hand, and then on the other hand, we have these kind of dreams of space and what space means. And I think that points to a conceptual misalignment sometimes, because what we think of when we think of space is this vast expanse that is sort of apolitical in that it exists literally off Earth. It's like it exists literally outside of governmental boundaries. So administratively speaking, New South Wales government and the sub-department of industry in New South Wales and then the space team, these are all very important divides. But when you're looking down at Earth from space, you can't see them, of course. And for people who work in the space sector, I think sometimes there's a particularly, what's the word for it? A broad view of the world that doesn't necessarily line up very well with administrative structures, because there's this conception of like space is different and we should be different because we should be aiming towards being more spacefaring in our approach. Maybe that's it. There's something ideologically and philosophically that I find about people in the space sector and the way that they approach problems that maybe adds to the frustration with government that you don't find when you're talking to people who work in tax law, because they're like, oh yes, detail is everything. So where I want to go with all of this meandering is basically, what do you think it is about space that gets people so excited? And like, do you reckon there's something in that there is something philosophically different about space to other areas? Or do you think that's nonsense or something in between?
There's definitely something different about the people who work in space. And I would say the way you just described 98% of the people who are on the ISU course that I did.
Okay.
Yeah, space is for everyone and, there's great aspirations. And, oh gosh, I don't know. I wonder if we sort of did ourselves in with that, with, the fairy tale of Apollo 11 and everything. We've sort of set ourselves up for that grand ideals sort of thing. But as you say, that's not going to, I get excited about space too, but you come to me with those grand ideas, grand visions, it's not going to get me anywhere with the decision makers in government. There's a bunch of, I sit at the friendly face of a bunch of economists who are like, okay, and what is that going to do for the people in New South Wales? So, and that's one of the things I did want to sort of say, at least in the case of New South Wales government, for most jurisdictions in Australia, and I'm sure we're not the only country, just remember, we're not a space agency. Our remit is not to promote exploration of space and to increase space R&D tech for the betterment of mankind, our remit is economic development, and we've just recognized that space is a priority sector for us with that. So we measure success by how many jobs it's creating, or how much economic growth it drives, or how it creates a stronger ecosystem here, or is it addressing a market failure? And if you can't, I know it's not as romantic, but if you can't help us tell that story, it's going to be very hard for us to help you. And that story is there in space. That's why we're doing it. And to be honest, that's what I geek out about, is the applications on Earth, the on Earth applications of space. At least that's what I first geeked out about. I'm becoming more and more of a general space nerd, but for me, it was first just how amazing it is, how interconnected it is into everything that we do in our entire economy and way of living. But yeah, you need to help us tell that economic story. Otherwise, it's really hard for us to help you.
Tell me more about that, Briony. What actually led you to get interested in space stuff? Because you've been into it for a little while. I suppose the kind of boring way of saying this in this week of International Women's Day is like, tell me about your career journey, which I feel I have been asked so many times, as if there is some sort of journey with a start point and events along the way and like some sort of goal that you're going towards. More often than not, I think it's just a collection of happenstance, and like you just end up doing things because they're kind of cool at the time, and then you do them for a while. But in your case, if we set all of that aside and we imagine that there is some sort of career journey, where did it begin for you? Was it that initial interest in space? Have you always been interested in space?
No, so not any more than the average Joe Bloggs on the street. I never wanted to be an astronaut. I still don't want to be an astronaut. The idea is terrifying to me. Moon and space was, cool, but didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I did my undergrad in war studies, and my master's is in conflict, security and development. Now, as it turns out, that's not entirely irrelevant to the space sector, but certainly not what I had in mind at the time. And so my career started more in the defense industry side of things, and in the private sector. And so I did my degree in London, and my first job was in London. Then I decided to move home. And not long after I moved home, I got the opportunity to work for a minister, which for me was not about the political stuff, but about an opportunity to get into the public sector. Portfolio then was cabinet secretaries, so nothing to do with space. And then my minister moved to industry, innovation and science, which I thoroughly enjoyed that portfolio. I got given space as part of my portfolio to look after when it wasn't really a thing. IAC was coming to Adelaide, and there was starting to be a bit of noise about what are we doing in Australia in space. The minister decided, okay, we need to look into this. We decided to set up a review into the Australian space industry. And I've always been a generalist, I would probably say. In most of my career, I've been a generalist. And this was the first time I really got stuck into a sector and into a project. Often ministers' offices are a bit hands-off on work that's going on in the department, but not in this case. I got really stuck in with the guys in the department doing the review. It's definitely still, I think it's still the highlight of my career, was sitting in the opening ceremony of IAC Adelaide and hearing the applause that went up in the room when we said we would be establishing an Australian Space Agency. It's not very often in government you get to make an announcement that gets that many people excited and that many people are happy about. It's not very common. So that was amazing. And then, I spent the next 6 months, I guess, walking the halls of Parliament with Megan Clark, trying to make the case for, funding the agency and all that sort of thing. So really got to be there for the early stages of it, which was amazing. And I just enjoyed doing that work so much that I wanted to keep doing it, and heard on the grapevine that New South Wales government was looking for someone to lead on their space policy stuff. And I'm from Sydney, so that's it. I applied immediately, and it's been amazing. I've sort of, I ended up becoming enough of a geek that my husband took me to Coonabarabran, to Siding Springs Observatory to propose and on a recent COVID honeymoon, made sure we did a road trip in New South Wales, and I made sure I went out to see the Parkes telescope and get a tour there, because I am definitely was not, but I am definitely turning into a space geek.
This is really reassuring to hear, because I think, Briony, you're one of the few people I know in the space sector who also really had no interest in space. Like, not no interest, but just like an average interest in space. I also didn't really think about space until I started my PhD. And I only thought that space would be interesting because I thought it was an interesting legal area. And I really had no attachment to it. And I feel like every time I hear someone interviewed about who works in space or does something with space, there's always that story about like, oh, when I was 3, I bicycled myself to the local markets and traded my first teddy bear and like a future contract for my firstborn in order to get a telescope, which I then like camped with for the rest of my life. Like it's a kind of trope that you have to be obsessed with space to work in the space sector or to have something to do with it. And at the same time, like I really resisted it. But as time's gone on, and I was researching the space sector, I think around the same time period you were, because I quit my job in investment banking the week of IAC Adelaide. And when I quit, everyone was like, what are you going to do? And I was like, something to do with space, and I'm going to do a PhD. And they were like, that's outrageous. And then like that got announced and they were like, how did you know? And then like spent the duration of my PhD kind of embedding as part of my research with the space industry. And now I feel like I'm inseparable. It's like like there's something about it that stays with you. It's almost catching. And I think it's just that feeling of community, maybe, or it is really cool. Like the tech is also really cool. Telescopes are awesome. But
I mean, I still don't know half the time people talk about some launch that was on the weekend that I totally missed and had no idea was on.
That's what Twitter's for.
But yeah, there's amazing people working in the industry. There's really cool tech being developed. They're pushing boundaries. So all the time, I mean, how could you not get excited about it once you're exposed to it?
Yeah, I guess so. But, at the same time, I think it's important that we don't let this idea that you have to be obsessed with space be a barrier to entry, because I always feel like I'm not obsessed enough. Like I'm with you. I don't know what launches are happening. I couldn't tell you the next thing about like what Elon's been up to on the weekend. It's not my area of interest, but it doesn't mean I'm not committed to what it is that I do. So
I've recently been trying to recruit a replacement for mat leave, because I'm going on maternity leave, and the number of people who are like, oh, I saw that, but I don't know anything about space. And I'm like, but you don't, that's fine. You don't need to. Your job, you'll learn it, and your job is to understand government and the interaction with industry and investment first and foremost. That is your area of specialty and expertise that you then apply to the space sector. And also, I knew nothing about space 5 years ago. And you can learn very quickly if you want to. And it's been a bit of a learning curve for me to accept that I don't have to be a tech a technical expert, technical background. It can be pretty intimidating to be in a room full of engineers and them talking about delta V and whatever else. And it's like, but one of the biggest things I learned from ISU was to not undervalue my strategy and policy background, and that's what I bring to the table. We need people from diverse backgrounds in the space sector.
Yeah.
It can't all be engineers.
And between ourselves, like, I think that the space sector is realizing this too. There's been, I don't know, I feel like my DMs have been slid into a lot recently, and I'm sure other people who work in less techie areas of the space sector are also getting people who are interested in expertise in various other areas, and the ability to think about problems and understand how they fit together. You don't have to be an expert on, as you say, delta V, or although you are now, having done it, ISU, you know all about, solar activity and how it affects satellites. But yeah, it's interesting. Susan just said in the chat, how long do you need cover for?
What, 9 months? But also applications have sadly closed.
Never mind. Well, still, it's a growing team. So there you go. Everyone who's listening, keep an eye out, keep an ear out. We've had another question, which was worth asking, always worth asking. We've had another question, which is, are you more into Earth orbiting observation stuff or off-Earth exploration stuff, if you had to pick your more preferred option?
From a professional perspective, it's the Earth observation or near Earth stuff. It's really fun to talk about and again, everyone here knows it, lots of applications, on Earth applications of space exploration technology and developments. And in fact, I hope I've got this right, wasn't Wi-Fi developed at SARO because of someone doing sort of deep space observations? It was astronomers, I think, that stumbled across something that was the key to unlocking Wi-Fi. And that's something we use all the time. So it's hard to pick between them, but I would say it's the Earth observations, it's the space domain awareness and the comms stuff, not least of all because, one, that's the easiest to translate to the people of New South Wales and the government as to why it matters, but also it's something that we have a lot of strengths in already in Australia and in New South Wales. We have a lot to offer there. We have a lot to offer in the other area too, but if you're making me pick one, it would be that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Look, off-Earth exploration is all well and good, but the stuff that's going on in orbit, the applications, as you say, the ways in which it can change and improve what we're doing on Earth are just so immense. That said, I do really love hearing stories about little robots being sent off to places, obscure and distant in the universe. I think that's pretty cool, to be honest. That's probably the thing I geek out about the most. Like our explorations outward and our big radio telescope arrays and so on. That's like where I'm like, that's awesome. But in terms of kind of what gets me up in the morning, if you like, it's like more close to home. So, maybe that makes me a little bit too focused on all of these things. Torsten wants to know, Star Trek or Star Wars?
I do like Star Trek. What, Next Generation? Picard, all the way.
You like the more recent one? Well,
is Next Generation recent? I don't know if
that's more recent.
It's not really recent.
Yeah.
That's the 80s. Star Trek Next Generation, because it has Jean-Luc Picard.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a bit of a fan myself of probably like I don't know. I always get caught up on this question because I really love the original Star Treks. They're just
it's
so
great
basic.
for a laugh, but
yeah, but they're so sweet.
Sweet.
I don't know.
I've always
kind
remembered an
of.
episode where they went to some planet that was living in perfect harmony, but there was some computer that's controlling things. And then as they leave, they're like, so we're reporting 5 divorces already today. And they all went, ah, ha, 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 ha. That's so great. Okay, bye. I'm like, this is weird.
You're not a fan?
Oh, it's good for a laugh, but no, Next Generation all the way.
Okay, good to hear. Good to hear. We probably only have time for maybe 1 or 2 more quick questions before we finish up. So please post those in the Q&A rather than the chat, because the chat is just way too difficult to keep track of. But while we wait to see if those come in, oh, hey, Kat, we've got a few more people in the chat. Excellent. While we wait to see if there are any more questions, my question for you, Briony, is looking forward in 2022. Obviously, you've got mat leave coming up, which is like the most amazing thing, but so that could be your thing. But what is it that you're really excited about? What's on the horizon that you can talk about or tell us about that might be happening? Yeah, what are you really amped for?
IAC Paris that I can't go to.
No, still think you can. We'll find a way.
I'm working on it. I'm figuring it out. No, look, there is definitely some exciting stuff that we can't talk about yet. But when it's announced, everyone will know why we're excited about it. And next steps for us actually is, so last year we were really focused on how do we, getting these programs up and running. Now they're established. Obviously keeping them on track, but what's next is the question for us this year, and figuring out what steps we want to take next with industry. So we're kind of in which is exciting in itself, a sort of reset phase now of, we still have to prove that those programs were worthwhile, worth the investment, and we're working. So there's a lot of focus on making sure they're successful, but what do we want to do next, and what should we be doing next? But I'm hoping that the next phase for New South Wales and Australia is really nationally led. The Australian Space Agency is working on the strategic direction, or whatever they've called it, and we end up playing a bit of competition with the other states. We don't like to do it. We really want to be part of Team Australia. It's been a little lacking at times, and we've been pretty honest and open in our views on that. I'd really like to see some strong national direction, and we're here to support that and contribute how we can.
Fantastic. I just muted because there's a loud siren going past and honking of horns. I think it's a fire truck. Any recommendations? We've had a question from Daniel as to the must-attend major space-based events in Australia or even New South Wales for companies who want to network, who want to get involved, who want to maybe spin in, as you say, which I'm totally going to use that phrase all the time now.
So firstly, there's the Australian Space Summit on the 24th of March in Sydney. So, that's the first one. That's a big one. Keep an eye out, again, National Space Industry Hub. They have their first Space Connect event on the 23rd of March, the day before, and that's with the CEO of Leo Labs from the US. And that's be a fireside chat, but also just a chance to connect. They will more and more be hosting those sorts of events every couple of months for industry, so definitely keep an eye on that. In fact, most of our programs tend to, from time to time, do networking events. We seem to have mostly stacked all our events on the front end in the space industry in Australia, the front end of 2022. So
it's so busy. I can't keep up with it all. We just had one down in Adelaide. I just couldn't get there, unfortunately.
I know, I thought you were going to be there, and then I was like, we can talk about Space Cafe in Adelaide, and then you weren't there. I was surprised.
I was planning to be there, and then I had to teach 4 classes. And I thought I had to teach them in person because we went back in person. And then at the last minute, they got moved online, but I was already, it was too late. And yeah, it was very sad. Next time I will be there.
Internationally, there'll be a big presence at Colorado Space Symposium first week of April from New South Wales and from Australia. And of course, IAC. We recently announced that, so New South Wales government is supporting the Space Industry Association of Australia in bidding to host IAC 2025 in Sydney. Which is exciting, but obviously we'll have a strong presence at IAC this year to make the case for Sydney.
I really hope we get that. That would be so cool. There are a couple of extra questions, but I'm actually going to save them because I think we need to hear about the upcoming Space Cafe stuff going on. And as Torsten says, Space Cafe Australia is another great event to attend to hear about things. In terms of the questions in the chat, I will get back to those and answer them offline. And we might revisit actually this question. So Belinda's asked about sovereign space capability and building that within Australia rather than relying on it internationally, which I think actually goes to the heart of everything we've already talked about, which is why I feel like it's not too, I don't feel too bad about kind of glossing over it this time. But the next edition of Space Cafe Australia will be digging way more into that question. So Belinda, come back, bring your question, and we will talk all about it. Is there anything, Briony, that you would like people to think about or mull on, or that you'd like to send them to?
So someone has been, thankfully, I'm very kindly posting links to our website, which is great, in the chat. But I just want to say, because we genuinely do want to engage with industry. And so just sort of my few tips would be, one, as I said, engage early and engage often. Keep us up to date on what you're doing. When you do want help, be specific about what it is. If you come and say, this is what we're doing, what can you do for us? We don't have a lot of time, and we're a small team, we're busy, nor is it really our job to come up with creative ideas of how we can just help you. So be specific about what help you're looking for from us. It would really help us and speed up the process. Especially if you're asking for money, be upfront about that. If that's what you need, at least tell us and how much it is, and then we can at least not beat around the bush. And as we've said, there's a lot of other ways we can help you other than financial, and we'd love to do that. Please understand that generally financially, budgets are set like a year in advance. So if it doesn't fit into a program, and we should have discussed this earlier, Annie, but if it doesn't fit into a program, we're probably not going to be able to help you financially if it doesn't fit into an existing financial program. So take advantage of the ones that there are. Otherwise, you need to give us a heads up really, really early if you think it's something that's worth us investing in, because even if we love it, we won't be able to turn around and give you $2 million next week. And yeah, just remember, we're not a space agency, we're an economic development agency.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Briony. I'm afraid we've got to come to an end because of time, even though I'd love to keep having this chat. But please be assured to everyone attending and watching that we will continue to engage the Australian space community and our future Space Cafe events with Space Cafe Australia, and also with the magazine and online. You can get involved. SpaceWatch.Global has all sorts of really interesting content that spans the globe and really connects Australia to the rest of the world. So thank you, Briony. And I'm going to hand back to Kiara to tell us all about the upcoming events.
Thank you so much. A huge thank you to Briony and Annie for this great conversation. It was an absolute pleasure to listen in. Yeah, and as Annie said, we have a lot of exciting events coming up in the next couple of weeks. So next week, on the 15th of March, we will have our 33 minutes with Dr. Andreas Wittmer on the topic of what can space and space regulation learn from the aviation sector. And then on the 21st of March at 6 p.m. CT, we will have our Space Cafe Black Ops, which is now hosted by the wonderful Dr. Emma Gatti, and she will be joined by Bled Bowen. On the 22nd of March, very exciting, which will be our 100th episode, we have a 33 minutes with Josef Aschbacher on ambitions for the future of Europe and space, taking a closer look at the Agenda 2025. On the 23rd and the 24th of March, there's the Impulse 22, the Space Outreach Conference. And then we have 2 more very exciting events on the 24th of March. So we'll have Space Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland on the themes of cooperation and humanity. And there will be the next event of the Space Arbitration Association with Laura Zelensky, which will be a panel looking at the question, is there room for private parties in international space law? And on the 25th of March, we'll have the next Space Café Germany, hosted by our guest presenter, Markus Moslechner, who will be talking to Dr. Ernst Pfeiffer, and this will be in German. All events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And as always, we would love to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today. Annie has already shown we have great t-shirts, wonderful mugs, a lot of awesome stuff. Or become a SpaceWatch.Global supporter. Thank you all very, very much for your interest today, for asking so many questions, for being so active in the chat. It was wonderful. And a huge thank you to Annie and Briony for this inspiring talk and for being our guests. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week in, week out. I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. Again, thank you for joining us. Hope to see you in the next weeks. And in the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher.